not.
It's
not about me. Booing isn't for me then either.
7 more G's, 7 more. Greetings. Greetings, Mayor. How are you?
Okay, I'm done.
Oh, I didn't tug myself.
Are you sure? You're not lying about it. I don't think so.
Not this time.
It's fine.
I don't think they're
Hi, Robin.
The amount of time that it takes.
Hi, how are you?
What to do?
Good. How you doing?
It's like 7 minutes.
What are you asking that I
Is your
try
son
to
going to
Yeah.
I know Yolanda's getting coffee.
That should carry 2 cups.
But you know what? I just said it.
Hey, how are you?
That's the same. That's what we do with our IT.
Well, they're talking.
Oh, well, we're gonna leave it.
Yeah.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Auburn study session for September 12th, 2022. I call this meeting to order. This evening's meeting is being held both virtually and in person. Hannah, would you please call roll?
Deputy Mayor Jayraj,
I'm here.
Councilmember Baggett,
Here.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Here?
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Malinga,
Here.
Councilmember Stearns,
I'm not sure what's happening.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Say here.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. This evening's agenda item for council discussion begins with the Q2 2022 financial update. And council, will you please welcome Director Thomas?
Good evening, Council. Deputy Mayor Jayraj, thank you for having me. I am going to be going over.
Your mic. Sorry.
Am I heard now? All right. Thank you for having me tonight. I am going to go over the second quarter 2022 quarterly financial report for the city. So you have the detail report in your council packet. It goes into a lot more detail, more of the numbers. This first slide is a summary of that the second page of that quarterly financial report, taking all of the different revenue sources and kind of summarizing them into more major categories. Going to, from a very high level, you can see that we, right now, in the blue column, that's the variance of our revenues that we've collected to date through June 30th, compared to what we've budgeted through June 30th. So currently, we are favorable by $3.5 million, which means we have collected $3.5 million more than we had budgeted for at this point this year. And then the green column is how our actual performance compares to the prior year during the same period of time. And we have collected a little over $2.7 million more than we did the prior year at this time. You can see in that blue and green column are the differences. And the big differences is in sales tax. Our property tax is right where we would expect it. We levy exactly what we are able to collect, and by the end of the year, we expect to collect exactly what we levied. Our sales tax has been outperforming, as well as our utility tax and our B&O tax. And then a little variances in some of our other major revenues, like licenses and permits, or intergovernmental and charges for services. We'll talk about those large revenue sources in more detail in a little bit. I did want to point out one, B&O tax, which is a brand new category a brand new category that I haven't presented before, because in quarter 2 of 2022 was the first time we received our first B&O tax distribution of 2022. And we had budgeted for 2022, we had expected about 50 businesses to be filing on a quarterly basis throughout the year, with an estimated of $500,000 in revenue. And in the first quarter, we actually collected almost $570,000. Deputy Mayor, did you want me to take a break? Were there technical difficulties? Okay. Okay. All right. Sounds good. The last line I'm going to go into more detail on the next slide is total expenditures, which is just kind of comparing our total expenditures that we've spent to date compared to what we've budgeted. As you can see, in that blue column, we have underspent $6 million year to date, but we have spent more than this time last year in 2021. And I'm going to go into more detail with our expenditures. These are, you can see in the second the second column from the right is the $6 million, our underspend, and that's broken down by all of our general fund departments. The biggest department, I think there's 3 departments by number that have the biggest underspends. That's community development, the police department, and then also our internal service funds. And the internal service funds, internal services includes human resources, finance, legal, and then our non-departmental budget within the general fund. On average, though, all of the departments have about the same amount of underspend, percentage-wise, right between the 10 and 20%, which has been pretty consistent for the city over the past couple of years. Mostly due to attrition and just the timing of contracts through June 30th of the year. I do have one thing ostracized there, and that is the housing and homelessness outreach. If you look at that was actually changed mid-year in 2021. So you're not looking, when you're looking at the 2021 year-to-date actual for the housing and homelessness outreach, we'd only spent $93,000 as of June 30th, 2021, and that was only because we had just moved that program. That doesn't reflect a full 6 months of expenditures in 2021. So hard to compare from 21 to 22. So diving right into our first, our retail sales tax, since that is one of our most significant revenue sources, one, and two, that's the most significant variance between our actual and our budget. We have been outperforming our sales tax, not only year over year, but also from budget. So we've collected $2.1 million over our year-to-date budget estimates, and we've collected $1 million over our 2022 actual collections. Broken down into different categories, this is how our retail sales tax collections break down between our major categories. Our manufacturing sector has had an uptick this year from a large reporter under this category. There was a little bit of a slowdown for a year and a half, and they have started reporting again in 2022. And so they're really carrying that sector pretty significantly. Also, our services category is overperforming 2021 by $300,000, and this is really our food accommodations services, so restaurants and fast food have been the highest performers really kind of overall in all sales tax, but even within that services category. I highlighted construction, even though there was a decrease, and just pointing out that sometimes I consider that as an indication of maybe our building permits and just general economic activity. This is the sales tax that we collect on large construction projects within the city. And we're still performing really well. 2021, we collected quite a bit of construction sales tax, so seeing a decrease isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of that is attributed to some of the large school district projects being completed at the end of 2021 and into 2022. The next major revenue for the general fund is utility tax. This is our third largest revenue source in the general fund. It's utility tax. We have a 6% utility tax on external utilities, with 5% of that going into the general fund, and we have a 10% tax on our internal city utilities, which is water, sewer, storm, and solid waste. 9% of that 10% goes into the general fund. We're currently performing $389,000 over our current budget, and we have outperformed the prior year by $438,000. The prior year is a little bit skewed. The comparison is a little bit skewed just because last year we hadn't collected a full 6 months worth of our internal service fund or our internal utility payments as of June 30th last year. So if you're actually comparing our current year to of 2022, comparing it to 2021, we're almost tracking identically. If you can see the green and blue line in that chart, see how closely the blue and green line, they almost intersect. And by the end of the year, we expect that to be, if we continue trending, it'll be pretty close to prior year. We are still trending over budget with electric and natural gas utilities making up the biggest increases from prior years and over our estimated budget for those two types of utilities. Building permits, we are currently still $92,000 over budget for the current year. We are falling behind the prior year by $225,000. We were trending very closely with 2021 until we got into June. You can see where the green line levels off a little bit in June. So there was a little bit, wasn't a dip. It just leveled off in a dip in comparison to the prior year. We've issued 234 permits so far in 2022, and that compares to 265 that we issued in 2021, with the average value now slightly lower in 2022 versus 2021. So just an indication of the value of overall projects are slightly smaller than in prior years. As just kind of a frame of reference, our 5 largest permits that we've issued this year make up 41% of the total revenue. So we do have a couple of large projects still in the queue, but they do make up a pretty significant portion of the overall activity in the permitting activity. The next category is our intergovernmental. These types of revenues include our state shared sales tax. So that includes our streamlined sales tax mitigation money that was restored mid-year last year, our motor vehicle excise tax, our marijuana and liquor excise tax distributions, and then our criminal justice sales tax. And that is a portion of the state's portion of sales tax that comes back to the cities, and it's tied to sales tax. So when sales tax trends higher, so does our state share distribution of the criminal justice sales tax from the state. Compared to our budget for 2022, we are $266,000 under budget, and we are behind 2021 by $450,000. But there's really two factors that explain these differences. One is our MIT compact, which was just adopted by the tribe last month. They've only made one payment so far for the year, although they have obligated a little over $2 million to the year to contribute towards the city costs of providing services. And so once we actually get caught up with all of the payments from the tribe through the end of the year, we're trending to be over budget in this category rather than under budget. And then what's skewing 2021 numbers is that when the state renewed the streamlined sales tax mitigation money last year, we got a portion of our 2020 distribution in 2021. So our 2021 number for the streamlined sales tax mitigation was actually higher than it should have been, which is making our 21 to 22 comparisons a little bit skewed. But taking these things into account, we are actually, taking all those factors into account, we're actually trending to be $427,000 over our year-to-date budget. Our other significant category is our charges for services. So we have four primary areas that we charge for service. We've got our general government charges, our public safety charges, development services, and culture and recreation. General government, these are, we've got our SCIP is included in this category, as well as our internal indirect cost allocations for finance, human resources, and legal. Those are the charges that we charge out to other funds to provide services from those departments. We are trending $95,000 under budget, and this is really due to the timing of SCIP payments. So the contributing agencies have been billed, we just haven't received all of those contributions yet. For public safety, we are $55,000 under budget. This is primarily reimbursements for law enforcement services, whether it's off-duty overtime, our school resource officers to the Auburn School District, as well as also our Muckleshoot Indian Tribe officer that we have working. We get reimbursement for that officer as well. So we have a little bit of reduction from the prior year, and that is really attributed to we had quite a bit of off-duty overtime that we charged the Criminal Justice Training Center last year that we have not charged this year, and that makes up the primary difference this year. Development services are above budget by $143,000. That is right on track with the building permits. So we have charges for services in our community development department, as well as the actual building permit revenue that we collect. So there are two separate types of revenues accounted for in two different places. This is the plan check fees, the facility extension charges, and the zoning fees that we charge, zoning and subdivision fees. So while our building permit activity is still up, so is our development services charges are also up. Culture and recreation is up, $286,000 over budget. Our golf course continues to remain strong, but again, they're not the ones necessarily performing over budget, but it's the recreation classes and special events. Just with the renewed participation in post-COVID, our 2022 participation is just so much higher than 2021. That is what is making up the significant increases to our budget, as well as our prior year numbers as well. So that was all general fund revenues and general fund expenditures. A couple other highlights I just wanted to point out because they're significant funding sources for our capital project funds. That is our real estate excise tax. We've collected $3.1 million through June 30th. That is $965,000 over the prior year in the same time frame, and $2 million over our year-to-date budget, which is really fantastic, except I'm going to just put some cautionary information out there. What's really driving our 2022 collections, you can see the big jump in March. We had 3 really large transactions in March that kind of bumped us up above our 2021 comparison numbers. And we've been pretty steady since that big jump in March. And the number of transactions have actually decreased by 1% in June. And in looking at some of the numbers that we've already been reported for, that have been reported for July, we are seeing a pretty sharp decline for July as well. So I think that's not big news to most of you. I'm sure if you've been watching the housing market at all, and just with increasing interest rates, the housing market has cooled off. So we would expect to see our real estate excise tax to also level off and maybe even decline a little bit over the second half of the year. Also, I did do a little, I looked just kind of comparing average home values year to date this year compared to last year. Part of the reason why I think we continue to trend high, even though we've had fewer transactions in real estate, the average home price sold in 2021, and this is just for the houses that sold in Auburn, in 2021, the average home sale price was $546,000 compared to $751,000 this year so far, year to date. So when you have a larger taxable base, our tax revenues increase also. And then the last 2 pieces are the impact fees, also tied to permitting activity and community development. So we collect impact fees for transportation as well as park. We have collected $510,000 year to date for transportation, and that is $750,000 under the prior year during the same time period. Although, again, looking into the future, it's timing of some transactions. It doesn't look so bleak as we look in a couple months out past June 30th. And then park impact fees, we've collected $250,000 year to date, and that is $72,000 over the prior year. Are there any questions?
Council, do you have any questions? Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Really fascinating numbers. Are there any of the numbers, like, I mean, there seem to be some pretty big differences, you know, like on the last real estate, the value of property. I mean, are there any things that, you know, are what you would consider trends?
Well, definitely, there are trends, and I think when I'm thinking of trends, I'm thinking of our bigger revenue sources. So REIT, we've definitely been trending up, and that's why we've been noticing over the last year and a half, 2 years, that trend has continued to increase, but just throwing out the caution that even though home values are so much higher, just transactions, I would expect to see that trend to right itself a little bit. And also sales tax. I think our sales tax trend has been just very strong, but just being cautious that we're in an inflationary period, and again, is there a recession coming, and making sure that we're not expecting to continually see these just super large increases year over year in those revenue sources, particularly because sales tax is such an important revenue source for the general fund.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Any other questions, Council? If not, Director Thomas, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is resolution number 5679. This is a resolution, it's support of comprehensive reproductive health care and marriage equality, and its support of protections through Washington state and federal legislative actions. Do any one of you want to talk on it, or shall I just go ahead and talk on it? I will do that. So, July 24th, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, holding that the Due Process and Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment do not apply to individual right to safe and legal abortion. This right that women, trans men, and non-binary people who can become pregnant have had for the last 50 years have been taken away from them in July. Also, the U.S. Supreme Court current interpretation of the 14th Amendment is a threat to the marriage equality. U.S. Supreme Court decision for turning Roe v. Wade disproportionately impacts people of color, people with disability, and those with low income, among others. As a city, Auburn continues to affirm as a safe, inclusive, and welcoming city for all people, no matter their need for abortion, gender identity, or who they want to marry. We as a city celebrate June as Pride Month each year. The recent Supreme Court decision goes against these values. We all have our stories making our own medical decisions, and on many others. I firmly believe most of us agree more than we are led to believe. It is our responsibility as local government officials to bring up thoughtful and nuanced conversation about these issues without being tied to political parties. Most of us hold thoughtful, full opinions based on facts, reason, and empathy. Our state and federal leaders bear responsibility to protect our rights. And as local government officials, it is our responsibility to lead these conversations in our community and to stand up for the rights of our community members. We need to use our voice to advocate for them at higher levels of government, and that is why I'm bringing forth this resolution. Council, thank you. I would like to move the resolution forward to the next council meeting. Do I have council member?
Can we second it?
Not yet. You got it. You got it. Okay, so I need somebody to move the resolution forward to the future council meeting.
I think the mayor has to say.
Doug, I don't believe there is the ability to make a motion and to vote at a study session. My understanding is it's only if there is concurrence by a majority of the council members to move something forward to an upcoming council meeting.
Well, Your Honor, we discussed this today. Looking at the rules, it doesn't prohibit a motion to move something forward. And because it's a little unusual circumstance, because this is a council member proposed resolution, it was determined that that was needed to move it forward, as opposed to the resolutions we normally have before the council at a study session. So under the clerk's advisement, we are looking for a motion and a vote to move this forward to the meeting.
Councilmember Brown.
I would make that motion. That is, I move to have resolution number 5679 added to the September 19th agenda.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Yolanda Trapp-Manuel.
And I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussions, Council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would like to enthusiastically support this resolution. I think that a person's right to choose not only what they do potentially as a parent or with their body, as well as who they marry and who they commit themselves to are so unique to each individual. And it's one of those spaces where it's interesting that as a government body that we are supporting the rights of the individual to be able to make those decisions. But I think that's exactly what we need to do, is continue to support that as best we can. And so I definitely support getting this resolution to council.
Thank you, Councilmember Baldwin. Councilmember Trout-Manuel?
And I also would like to support this. I personally was affected by this, not myself, but within our family. A 13-year-old was raped and found out that she was pregnant, and if it wasn't for the abortion law, she was not able, she would have been carrying this child, and now she's a grown woman after having the trauma of having an abortion, but she is so happy that she did it because now she can make her own decisions on having a child on her own.
Thank you, Councilmember Trout-Manuel. Any other discussions? Councilmember Stearns?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to support the motion, the right to control your own body is fundamental, in my view, is a fundamental right, a human right. So I'm glad to have this chance to support it.
Thank you, Councilmember Stearns. Councilmember Brown?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would just concur with what has been said and also support moving it to a full council meeting.
Thank you. Any other? Councilmember Baggett?
Well, I concur with everything that's been said, and I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Council. Now we move to all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those not in favor, please say no. Resolution moves to September 19th. Thank you, Council. Okay. So the next on the agenda is we have Resolution 5682, and for that we have Director Tate and
Deputy Mayor, my name is Doug Ruth. I'm an Assistant City Attorney, and I'll be speaking tonight about Resolution 5682. If the resolution is a little bit like the past one in that it takes something that's a national issue that's been in the headlines and really brings it to Auburn. You may have been aware of the various litigation against pharmaceutical companies, suppliers, distributors in response to the opioid crisis. Maybe you've seen the headlines about various states suing Purdue Pharma, Johnson & Johnson. The state of Washington has been involved in these and on the forefront of many of them, including the case that's really relevant tonight, and that's against Cardinal, McKesson, and Amerisource Bergen, three companies that are wholesalers or distributors of pharmaceuticals, including opioids. The state and various few cities and counties initiated litigation against these three companies. There was a trial, and a settlement has been proposed, and the terms of this settlement present Auburn with an opportunity. 5682 really looks to whether or not the council wants to take advantage of the settlement or not. Conceptually, I guess I would analogize it a little bit to those letters you get in the mail with a lot of legal language in it, and it says it's a class action notice for a settlement, and you can check a box and be part of the class action or not. You probably didn't even know that you were within a class, but you were because you are a T-Mobile subscriber, you own a Volvo, and there was a class action litigation against those companies, and now you're going to get $3.60 off your bill or extended warranty. Conceptually, it's like that because the settlement distributes the settlement funds to all cities above 10,000 population. It's not a class actual settlement, but it's similar to that because it's distributed. The Attorney General, of course, recognizing that the opioid crisis impacted all communities in Washington and counties, has structured the settlement so that those cities and counties will all benefit. It's hard to, you can't really determine the total settlement right now, but it's in the range of 500 million. 215 million would go to, approximately would go to local governments, and that would be spread over 17 years. And then for the City of Auburn share, again, we couldn't determine that because there's a formula and it depends on how many cities are involved and other factors. So we don't know exactly, but it would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. Now one of the key points here is that the settlement will only become effective for all cities and counties if 90% agree to join in on the settlement by September 23rd, which is approaching quickly. Now, if we were to participate in the settlement, we would give up our right to sue these three companies for the opioid epidemic. The other strings attached would be that we could only use the money for the approved purposes. Those are listed in the settlement documents, and they cover a wide range of uses. Some of them are, for instance, are like treatment, counseling, screening, recovery services, criminal justice intervention, prevention, infant health care, first responder assistance, training, pregnancy health care, and overdose response. There's 11 pages, so it's very broad areas, and I think I'll ask Jeff to speak a little bit about what the local uses within those approved options are that potentially Auburn could use the money for. So the structure of the settlement would send the money to a regional council, the Opioid Abatement Council. There would be one for King County. Agreement would be formed that would regulate how the various jurisdictions would get the funds, and that council or committee would handle the administrative duties. We could also choose at a later time, that's not something the council needs to choose with this resolution, but we could choose, if we accept to be part of the settlement, to receive the funds directly. But then we would be responsible to come up with the methodology for how to distribute those funds in Auburn. We'd be responsible for having community input and the other administrative requirements to spending the money. We'd also be responsible for the costs, which could not be more than 10% of the funds we receive. So the first fund, or first disbursement, if we decide to be part of the settlement, would come on December 1st, 2022. And like I said before, they would come annually for 17 years in July. If we want to take part of the settlement, the council needs to authorize the mayor to sign 3 forms. The participation form, which is a very detailed release of liability. That would be us releasing these companies from their liability to us. Also the allocation agreement. This is how it determines how the money will be paid out to the various cities. And then an MOU, which is more of an internal document for state of Washington regulating the distribution. So that sets up the council that I was talking about, the Opioid Abatement Council, and the limits on administrative costs, et cetera. So we need to have approval of those 3 documents to move forward. I'll turn it over to Jeff, and then I think both of us will be open for questions.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you. I come and sit before council just to lend support or reassurance that the city can use these funds. So as Doug describes the kind of legal background, the framework, and the details that go along with a settlement, if the city of Auburn and other Washington cities and Washington state are end up being the recipient of these funds, it's a department like community development. It's not just community development, but we are one department that can provide a statement that these funds can be put to use consistent with the terms that are outlined in the Memorandum of Understanding. So like Doug said, there's 11 pages. It's pages 62 through 72 of your council packet that describes a lot of different ways that these funds can be deployed into our community for addressing an opiate issue in our community. Through community development, that naturally would probably go through our human services group and potentially partnering with other agencies, but there's lots of other options too. It could stay more local and end up being administered through Kent Hayes' work. It could be done in a way where we collaborate with other municipalities that are all facing some of the same issues. So really my purpose here tonight is to say the amount of money that would be distributed in the number that Doug was talking about in the hundreds of thousands, and over a period of that 17 years or 18 years is something that we can commit to managing and deploying.
Council, do you have any questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I've read through this, and I'm very proud of the state's Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, for the work that he's been doing in this area in particular. And so to clarify, my understanding is that there had also been attempts to do a national settlement, but the option for Washington State was to stay apart from that and go for this settlement, which actually has allowed for a higher settlement amount. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's true also, I believe, with the Johnson & Johnson litigation where it's in bankruptcy, and the State Attorney General has resisted the bankruptcy result and is seeking a higher amount.
And that's a separate settlement to arrive in the future, potentially?
Potentially.
Okay. Just for other council members, having looked at this in the memorandum of understanding, the programs that they had outlined all, I think, are right in line with the types of programs that we would look to do as a city, as far as being able to deal with the addiction issues that are out there in the community. So I think this would be a really good opportunity to get additional funding in this area. I think that the risks we have of not being able to, sue these organizations in the future, I think being a part of the state's program, the state settlement, gives us a good return and good leverage and a time to actually begin receiving funds and get that back out to people who need it. So I would move in the direction of supporting this.
Any other questions, Council? Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was wondering, so in terms of things we could, use the money to help out, would like the We Care medically assisted treatment program be one of those?
Yeah, that's a good example of where we could make a choice down the road that if that's an efficient way to use the funds, if it's an effective way of using the funds, we can partner with an agency that delivers those services.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Would the council be involved at all in recommending distribution of those funds among the departments, much like what we did with the ARPA funds?
Well, I think that the next step is to develop a strategy on how to deploy, how to spend those funds, what commitments to make. It's a hard question for me to answer. I think that if we brought something back forward to City Council as a follow-up item to say, here's a draft plan, a draft approach, and then go from there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I just also am supportive of this idea. We have seen the damage in our community, in our families. People get injured at work. Next thing, they have pharmaceutical drugs, and pretty soon they can't afford them, and they've gotten hooked, and next thing they're on heroin or some other drug. And it's affected most families in this community, I'm fairly certain, so appreciate this as an opportunity to help repair some of that damage.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
I also am in favor of this as well, because you highlighted everything that in the Wellness Committee has been looking into for extra fundings and everything. And as our council member Baldwin mentioned, that this is extra money that we can really use in our community to help out of those needies.
Any other questions, council? If not, I've got a question. I was looking at the charts, and I see that our neighbors like Algona and Pacific probably would not get part of the share if they were to even join in. How is that going to be distributed if they have a need? Is it going to come through the county?
And I take it that they will not receive it because they're under 10,000 population.
Yes.
Right, correct. First, I'll start with saying I don't know why that cutoff was used. That is part of the settlement. I don't know if that was something that the Attorney General decided or if that was something proposed by the distributors, the three defendants. I will say that half the settlement money is going to the state, and that would be used for opioid treatment as well. So those communities would potentially receive support from the state level for the opioid epidemic. But they would not receive anything directly as Auburn would.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry. Council, do you have any other questions? If not, thank you, gentlemen. Council, we now move into Public Works and Community Development discussion items. And for that, I turn it over to Committee Chair Stearns, who will head up the discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the first item that we have, the Public Works and Community Development Committee has, is the Capital Project Status Report and Future Project. And it says Director Galb here, but I'm assuming the gentlemen there have this. Thank you.
Can you please turn the mics on? Thank you.
Good evening, Council, Deputy Mayor. My name is Jeffrey Bender. I have with me Alexi Koshman and Seth Wickstrom. We will be presenting to you the Capital Project Status Report, as well as the Fall Quarters feature projects. A quick update on the current status of our capital projects. The capital project team currently has 39 active capital projects, totaling approximately $71.3 million in value. Of those 39 active projects, 20 of those projects are currently under design. And those projects approximate total value of $39.2 million. The remaining 19 are in the construction phase, and that value is approximately $32.1 million. Also wanted to share a quick snapshot of where we are with our capital project construction contracts. Year to date for 2022, we have procured 11 capital construction contracts, totaling $9.7 million in value. And we anticipate releasing 2 more contracts this year for procurement. And those 2 contracts value a total of the $4.6 million there shown on the slide with the little red box. Sorry, one thing I want to note, before we move into the feature projects, I was going to highlight those 2 projects for you that we plan to let out for construction this year. The first of those 2 projects is CP 1603, the Coal Creek Springs Transmission Main Repair Project. And that project can be found on page 8 of the CPS report. And I believe that is on page, I think it was 89 of your council packet. On the slide here, I want to point out the map on the right-hand side of the slide. This location of this project is in the Game Farm Park facility. This project will install a new transmission main over the river, and it'll be attached to a new pedestrian bridge. This pedestrian bridge will connect the trail systems in Game Farm Park as well as the Game Farm Wilderness Park, providing pedestrian crossing over White River. We are anticipating construction to start in 2023. And the photos on the left-hand side of the slide here are examples of what we could see. The bridge is being developed based on what is in Sumner, so very similar construction and very similar look, and very similar attachments of the water main under the bridge. The Coal Creek Springs water supply is our largest in the city, so it's crucial that we keep and maintain this for the city water system. The second project that I wanted to highlight is the CP 2137 Frontage Road Culvert Repair Project, Phase 2. This project is found on page 15 of your capital project status report, which is page, I believe it was 103 in your council packet. And I apologize if my numbers are slightly off. Those are what I'm recalling off the top of my head. This project, as you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide, the map there is located in the northwest corner of the city. It is on Frontage Road, just south of 277th Avenue, or 277th Street, and it's just south of that U-Haul facility that's out there. This project will include asphalt restoration, replacement and installation of curb and gutter, as well as restoration to the shoulder on the west side of the road, and we will complete it with some new channelization and pavement markings. Construction for this project is anticipated to be started in October of 2022 and completed this year. The photos I have on the right side of the slide here, the one in the center is a photo taken during last year emergency repair that we did to unblock the culvert. As you can see, access to the face of our culvert is not easily obtained. So phase 1 of this project removed all of those concrete obstructions over the channel there and blocking our culvert face. And you can see that in that center photo on the slide, the second photo down there. And the third photo shows its current condition today before restoration is complete. So now I'm going to turn it over to Seth and Alexi to present to you guys the capital projects or the feature projects for this fall quarter.
Hi, my name is Seth Wickstrom, and there's actually 2 featured projects for this quarter. They're both sidewalk projects. The first one is the Auburn Way South Side Sidewalk Project. And I will cover that in the first couple slides, and then I'll pass it to Alexi to cover the Riverwalk Drive Southeast Non-Motorized Improvement Project. So this first slide actually covers both projects. It kind of gives you some history of how these projects came about. In November 2020, the city and the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe established a work group. Basically, city staff and MIT staff get together and discuss and figure out how to implement non-motorized improvements along State Route 164. State Route 164 it's also called Auburn Way South. And then in December 2021, the city and MIT signed agreements with each other to implement the 2 sidewalk projects we're discussing for this presentation. So this is specific to the Auburn Way South project. This is a map showing, it's a little hard, I guess it's a little hard to kind of see the shading, but the road on the top there, that's Auburn Way South, kind of going up the hill towards the casino. The intersection M Street's there on the left, and the Muckleshoot Casino's at the top on the right. And then the red line shows the project. I'm actually the project manager for the Auburn Way South Side Sidewalk Project. And that'll be installing sidewalks on the south side of Auburn Way. The limits are Howard Road. Basically, the sidewalk will connect in front of Frugal's, and then it'll end kind of near the Muckleshoot bingo hall. It'll connect to some existing sidewalk on that side. And then this map also shows the next project Alexi will be talking about, the Riverwalk Drive Southeast project. So these 2 pictures here show the existing conditions on Auburn Way South. You can't really see it, but so the picture on the left side of the picture would be the north side of Auburn Way. Back in 2009, we installed sidewalks on that side of the street. And then you can see on the picture here, this is the south side of the road. There's currently no sidewalks, but it's obviously heavily used because there's kind of a primitive trail on this part of the sidewalk. And then the right shows Howard Road, and then it's kind of hard to see, but on the left is Auburn Way, and you can currently see there's no pedestrian crossing here. So basically, pedestrians just have to run across the road and then walk up this primitive trail if they to get up on Auburn Way. This slide shows examples of what the project's going to look like. The picture on the top, that's actually the new sidewalk that we installed in 2019 on the north side of Auburn Way. And essentially, with this project, we'll be doing the same thing on the south side. It'll be new sidewalk, curb and gutter, and then we'll move the guardrail to the back of the sidewalk. And then the picture on the bottom, this is an example of what the crossing on Howard Road will look like in front of Frugal's. It'll be a raised crosswalk, so the crosswalk will be above the road grade. There'll be curb bulb out, so the curbs will kind of bulb out into the street. And then we'll also install rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are essentially those signs on either side. A pedestrian can push a button and yellow lights will flash under those pedestrian signs. This slide shows the schedule and funding for the project. The project's estimated to cost $845,000. The Muckleshoe Indian Tribe is contributing $75,000. We have a grant from WashDOT for $695,000, and the city is contributing $75,000. The project's currently in design. We should have design complete in January of next year, and then we'll bid and advertise anticipated to bid and advertise in February. And then the project should be constructed in spring of summer of next year. And then I will pass it to Alexi, and then we'll, at the end, we'll open it for questions.
Good evening, council members and mayor. My name's Alexi, and I'm the project manager for the...
Alexi, can you speak up a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah. Again, good evening. My name is Alexi Koshman. I'm the project manager for the Riverwalk Drive Southeast Non-Motorized Improvements Project that we're going to speak on today. It's also going to be one of the featured projects. This project is located near the Muckleshoe Casino. It's between Auburn Way South, and it runs just past Howard Road. As we know, Riverwalk is an important corridor that connects residents south of Howard Road to the Auburn Way or Auburn Way South. The existing condition of Riverwalk is it consists of a descending road with hillsides on both sides. Stormwater at this location is conveyed through ditches that are on both sides, and they kind of go into a nearby ponds. Some deficiencies within the project limits. This project include missing sections of sidewalk. Parts of the road are a bit narrow. There's poor lighting, and there's no crossing across Riverwalk at Howard Road. And these are some of the photos of the existing condition. Some improvements that the current project will provide includes expanding the road, adding sidewalk on the east side of Riverwalk, adding street lighting, replacing pavement surfaces, and having substantial stormwater improvements, which include replacing the existing ditch on the east side of Riverwalk with large diameter storm piping. At the Howard Road intersection, we plan on installing bulb outs and rectangular rapid flashing beacons with advanced warning. As you can see, the photos shown are just example renderings of how we envision the intersection to look. And again, as Seth stated earlier, you'll have an ability to press the button for a pedestrian, flash some lights, have the car stop, and it'll kind of provide a safe crossing across Riverwalk. City of Auburn has partnered with WashDOT and the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe for this project. Muckleshoot Indian Tribe will contribute $332,500. WashDOT will contribute $635,000, and City of Auburn will contribute $1,582,500, of which $332,500 will come from the Arterial Street Fund, $400,000 will come from the Arterial Street Preservation Fund, and $850,000 will come from the Storm Drainage Fund. Currently, the project is in design. We anticipate to finish the design of this project first thing or in January of 2023. Following, we anticipate in February to advertise and award the project, and we see construction being completed sometime in the fall of 2023. These two future projects that me and Seth have spoken, the Auburn Way South Side Sidewalk Project and the River Drive Southeast Non-Motorized Improvements Project, will be featured in the winter issue of the Auburn Magazine. And with that, I'd like to open it for questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
I just want to say, I live up there, and since I've lived there for 13 years, that all of them, every single sidewalk that you're planning on doing has been needed so much. And the crosswalk with the flashing lights will help a lot of our pedestrians that walk up and run up the hill. So that's going to be really, really nice. Riverwalk, sometimes I'm scared to drive there during the nighttime because there's no lighting, and there's part sidewalk, part gravel road, part other. So I am looking forward to seeing this project start and finish. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Jayaraj.
Thank you, Council Member Stearns, or Chair Stearns. Gentlemen, I have one particular question, the road by Frugals. Now, that's heavily used, and have you thought about how the traffic is going to be diverted when you guys are, when the construction is going on? And the businesses will be affected when the construction is going on as well. So how are we going to mitigate all that?
I don't think we're that far in the design yet to know for sure. We probably will have to close the road for a couple days because the raised crosswalk will involve pouring concrete, which will take a couple days to cure. And the road's so narrow, it'd be hard to do it in halves and keep it open to traffic. So the road will probably have to be closed for a couple days, but we haven't figured out what the detour route's going to be, so we're not quite sure what the impact's going to be yet.
Okay, so is the construction is only going to be for a couple of days?
For Howard Road, we'll have to close it for a couple of days to pour the concrete for the raised crosswalk. I guess I shouldn't say for sure because we're still in the middle of design, but we currently don't anticipate having to close it more than that. It should be open during construction.
Okay, but there's also residents also over there, the low-income housing. So we got to take that into consideration as well. So
definitely, and when we do close the road, we'll provide a detour route as convenient as possible, and try to minimize the closure to only what's actually needed to build it.
That was my concern because there's residents that live on that road, and if you close that, I mean, I think that's the only gate that they go in and out.
So if I can add, so Howard Road is actually two-way up until that residential point, so you can
Okay.
actually access it from our street. And so the detour route would likely go around and utilize our street so that they maintain access at all times. We would not close access to the residential units.
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid. Yeah, we don't have to close a small portion where we're building, not the entire road.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair Stearns. Both of these look fantastic, so very excited to see the improvements coming to our streets. I was curious, in the write-up you had for the features that are going to be included with both of those sort of spotlight projects, are we including bike lanes in that, in either of those projects, do you know?
So for the projects, we currently do not have bike lanes scheduled. The Riverwalk Drive is identified in the transportation plan as a future potential bike route. It is not designated to be a bike route for sure at this time. And as far as Auburn Way South goes, that project has widened shoulders. So instead of having a 12-foot lane, we have a 14-foot lane. That provides that extra little buffer for bicyclists to use as they're able.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Councilmember Baggett.
Just a kind of a reconciliation here for my benefit, if nothing else. In looking at the project, the capital project report, it shows for that CP 2121 a different number for the budget. Like 1.8 or 9 million versus 2.5 or 2.6 million. Is that number to be adjusted up?
Can you provide me the number that project, to which page that's
Yeah,
on?
CP 2121.
Right, I know the 2121. Do you know which page on the CPS?
It's on page 9, I think, of the
Page 9,
project.
thank you. Oh, there it is. So the 1.872 that is shown here is what we had budgeted. The 1.5, let me go back to that slide real quick. The 1.872 is what we had budgeted at the time the CPS report was printed. The budget that is shown in this slide is reflective of what we have today. That takes into account
it's an
a
adjusted
budget
or
amendment
revised
that
number,
hasn't
right?
been completely adjusted yet, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And to clarify, what we're adding to that is the overlay of the roadway, and so that's coming out of the preservation funds and is part of the CFP proposal. Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Baldwin.
Sorry, one more question. So on, not on the presentation, but on the capital project status report, page 1, it noted for capital project 1916 that the Academy pump station replacement, it looked like that had been suspended and was originally slated to end in September. Do you know what the new timeframe would be for that?
So that project is my project. I'm the project manager on that one. The suspension, we are anticipating work to resume here in the next week or so. We've been working with PSE to reroute the power service through the MIT smoke shop parking lot. And some of that took time with getting that coordination done and getting all of the necessary agreements in place. That work was completed today. So I will be working with the contractor and getting startup testing scheduled. And we anticipate that we'll be really close to being complete by the end of this month, and it might extend in a little bit into October.
Okay.
But the new pump station should be coming online here real quick.
Okay. Yeah, I was looking ahead to the rainy season that might actually start at some point this year. So, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was wondering what we were doing up there. And is that Auburn's property or Muckleshoot property?
The property along the hillside?
Yeah.
So the property on the hillside is actually Muckleshoot property. So the Auburn property line, it is pretty much at the top of the hill, about 15 feet to the east of where our fencing is on the property. The work that's being done in conjunction with the improvements at the bingo or at the smoke shop is providing their with the rework of the parking lot, access to the facility that is given to us through an agreement has to be maintained. and they're improving that access so that with the improvements in the parking lot, traffic flow in and out of our facility for maintenance is able to be maintained and meets the needs of the smoke shop.
Okay, thank you, because I was wondering what was going on up there. Thank
Yes.
you.
Any further questions? I have a couple. But first, yeah, the Riverwalk project is great. You know, we used to live, my family, we used to live behind the casino, so now our kids would go to Olympic, so every day they'd, you know, have to trek up the hill, and no one wanted to walk along Riverwalk, so they cut through the woods, which, you know, not really thrilling for parents. The sidewalk that's going up Auburn Way South, is there going to be lighting?
I think that there currently is lighting, so we'll move some of the lighting to the back of the sidewalk, but I think the whole corridor is currently lit.
Okay, great. And then the earlier project up by the U-Haul, the culvert. What is the culvert for? Is there a creek or a stream?
It is a storm drainage culvert. It's a tributary to Mill Creek, and the area just east of the culvert is it's not technically a stormwater pond. It's more of a
It's flood storage.
yes, flood storage. Thank you.
Okay.
So it's to help convey water out through the city and out to Mill Creek.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Apologize for that. We're next going to go to ordinance number 6884, and we're going to talk about fences. So, thank you and welcome.
Okay. Good evening, council members. My name is Alexandria Teague, and I am a senior planner in the Community Development Department. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to talk at you. So I'm here tonight to discuss ordinance number 6884. It's a fence and retaining wall text amendment that amends the zoning code. That's Title 18. The materials in my presentation begin on page 105 of your packet, and I'll try to keep my presentation to under 15 minutes. So my intent tonight is to briefly discuss the purpose of the fence and retaining wall text amendment. Now, before I go further into the purpose and background of the text amendment, I'd like to briefly recount the Planning Commission's review of the text amendment. So the Planning Commission reviewed this text amendment and considered the effects of the changes on public and private property owners at its June 7th regular meeting. Planning Commission subsequently held a public hearing on July 19th in which they forwarded a recommendation of approval to City Council. All right, so now let me move on to the background and purpose of the text amendment. And let me start with an update to the fence standards. So the fence standards have existed in the zoning code since the earliest zoning code was adopted in 1987. This is under Ordinance 4229. This repealed the previous zoning code and created a new codified zoning code. So the fence standards have been around for quite some time, and they even likely predate this ordinance. Now, over the years, the standards have been revised to provide clarification, to respond to issues with implementation, or address confusion. So the latest updates to the fence standards occurred in 2012. This is under Ordinance 6419, and in 2013 under Ordinance number 6461. The change in 2012 added a provision related to fence gates and vehicle refuge areas. The change in 2013 added provisions related to electric fences, including electrification, placement, height, signage, and permitting requirements. The fence standards have not been revised since 2013, so it was appropriate to review these standards for possible revisions. The proposed changes before you tonight are based on staff's continuing implementation of these fence standards. And the changes are intended to respond to issues of implementation and harmonize with standards of other codes. For example, a fence constructed in the front setback, that's the front yard area on a person's property, it can be 72 inches or 6 feet in height as long as it provides visibility. However, there's no definition in the zoning code currently for visibility or when a fence provides sufficient visibility. And this is a common question that we get from the public. So included in this text amendment is a definition for visibility as well as other changes that respond to issues of implementation such as this. Okay. So let me move now onto the retaining wall standards. Staff is proposing a new section for retaining walls because no specific retaining wall standards exist in the zoning code. Rather, the zoning code is silent on standards specifically for retaining walls. Standards related to retaining walls only exist in the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. And very quickly, the International Building Code and International Residential Code contain standards related to structures such as construction, alteration, relocation, use, and occupancy. And the IRC is an amendment to the IBC related to the construction of 1 and 2 family dwelling units and other things related to these structures such as retaining walls. So the IBC and the IRC provide standards related to the construction, design, and placement of retaining walls in relation to other structures based on building code requirements, not on zoning code requirements. So there's a disconnect between the IBC and the IRC and the zoning code. This causes confusion for staff and confusion of implementation of code. For example, since the zoning code is silent on standards for retaining walls, the zoning code doesn't address whether a retaining wall is considered a structure and is therefore required to meet the zoning setbacks. And generally, the setbacks are those areas on a person's property in which a structure is prohibited. And so staff is left to determine, is this retaining wall a structure? And if so, is it required to meet setbacks? The new retaining wall standards are intended to address issues such as this by creating a new set of zoning code standards that are consistent with the IBC and the IRC. So, to conclude, the proposed changes in the fence and retaining wall text amendment you have before you tonight, they will help clarify, refine, and create standards that will provide for consistency and implementation for staff and for the public. So that concludes my very brief presentation on this text amendment. And if it's acceptable to council, staff has tentatively scheduled this text amendment for the September 19th council meeting. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions on fences and retaining walls? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair Stearns. My only concern is with the residential fences that's there right now. Are we going to grandfather those who have already got fences?
Yes, but I don't think anybody's fence that currently well, how am I trying to say this? I don't think this would cause anybody's fence to be non-conforming, that's what I'm saying. Because in some instances, if the fence doesn't provide sufficient visibility, it already didn't provide sufficient visibility. This just helps us clarify what that is. Or if a fence was perhaps too tall, if it exceeded the height limit, it already exceeds the height limit. I didn't change anything like that. So I don't think there are any changes in the zoning code that are proposed that would make a fence non-conforming. But if a fence perhaps was constructed before these regulations go into effect, then perhaps we could consider their fences legal non-conforming.
Say that again, the last part
So
of it.
if someone's fence, if they can demonstrate that their fence was erected before this code proposed changes go into effect, then perhaps we may be able to consider their fence a legal non-conforming structure.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Stearns.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we're good on fences. Thank you.
Okay.
And next we are going to something next. My computer is acting weird. The environmental park. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And,
Thank you. Councilmember. So the second ordinance I'm here to discuss tonight is ordinance number 6885. This is a text amendment to remove the EP Environmental Park Zone and BP Business Park District from Title 18, the Zoning Code, and Title 3, the Revenue and Finance Code. The materials for this presentation begin on page 120 of your packet, and again, I will keep it under 15 minutes. Note that I'll refer to this text amendment as the EP for Environmental Park and BP for Business Park District. I will try to enunciate the difference between those two, but for shorthand, I'll refer to it as the EP and BP text amendment. So again, before I go further into the history and purpose of this text amendment, I want to briefly recount the Planning Commission's review of this text amendment. So the Planning Commission reviewed this text amendment and considered the effect of the changes also at its June 7th regular meeting. Planning Commission subsequently held a public hearing on July 19th in which they forwarded a recommendation of approval to City Council. All right, so my intent tonight is briefly discuss the history and reason for the removal of the EP and BP zone from Title 18 and Title 3. So I'll start with the history of the EP, or Environmental Park Zone. So this zone, the EP zone, was adopted in 2006 under ordinance number 6037. The EP zone was intended to create a zone with appropriate uses near the Auburn Environmental Park. For reference, the Auburn Environmental Park is located between West Main Street to the west, into Urban Trail to the east, 15th Street Northwest to the north, and West Valley Highway to the west. Under this ordinance, approximately 75 parcels in proximity to the Auburn Environmental Park, again, that's the city's natural environmental park, were rezoned from M1 light industrial to, and R2 single-family residential to the EP zone. The purpose of the EP zone was to allow uses in proximity to the Auburn Environmental Park that benefit from this location and complement the park. Uses included like medical, biotech, green technologies, things of that nature. But it's difficult for staff to determine which, if any, parcels were developed under the EP zone. Per city permit records, it appears that most of the parcels that were zoned EP or rezoned EP were developed prior to being rezoned EP. So if that makes sense. This is supported by the fact that the intent statement for the EP zone in code states that much of the property in this zone was developed under earlier standards, so the goals of the district will be realized over a period of time as the properties are redeveloped. Now, in 2017, under Ordinance 6660, the 75 parcels were rezoned to M1 light industrial. The reason is that since the inception of the EP zone, there had been very little private sector investment into these privately owned properties, while there had been substantial investment in the M1 and M2 heavy industrial properties. And I'm taking that language from the ordinance that actually rezoned them to M1. So then, in 2018, under Ordinance 6691, the city-owned parcels formerly zoned EP and associated with Auburn Environmental Park were rezoned to open space, effectively making the EP zone no longer a mapped zoning district. So while the EP zone has remained in code since 2018, no parcels have been rezoned to EP, nor has any development been proposed or completed using the EP standards. So the EP zone is no longer mapped on the city zoning map, or included on the comprehensive plan. It was removed from the comprehensive plan in 2015 under Ordinance 6584. So staff is proposing to remove the zone from the zoning code as it is effectively no longer needed. Okay, now I'll move on to the history of the BP zone, or Business Park District. So the BP zone is a little older. It was adopted in 1987 under Ordinance 4229. Again, this is the ordinance that created a new codified zoning ordinance in Title 18. New zoning districts, such as the BP zone, were created under that ordinance. Now, the purpose of the BP zone was to respond to modern trends in business park development, by providing suitable area for industrial, professional office, service, and commercial uses within a planned, well-managed site with high-quality development standards. So approximately 6 parcels, collectively known as the Opus Park 167 Service District, that are located at the southwest corner of 15th Street Southwest and O Street Southwest, this is just south of the mall, were rezoned to BP in 1997 under Ordinance 4962. So the zone was created, but no parcels had been rezoned to BP until 1997. Then in 2001, under Ordinance 5607, the uses for the BP zone were amended to allow for more uses and encourage more development. The Opus Park Service District was completed in 2002. Since then, no other parcels have been rezoned or developed using the BP zoning standards. So then in 2006, under Ordinance 6067, the parcels constituting the Opus Park Service District were rezoned to C3, that's heavy commercial, during an annual amendment cycle. This effectively made the BP zone no longer a mapped zoning district. And while the BP zone has remained in code since 2006, no parcels have been, it's been in effect longer than 2006. Sorry, so parcels have, but since then, no other parcels have been rezoned to BP, nor has any development been proposed using the BP standards. Therefore, since the BP zone is no longer mapped on the city's zoning map or included in the comprehensive plan, staff is proposing to remove this zone from the zoning code, as it is, again, as is also effectively no longer needed. So to conclude, both the BP and the EP zone have remained unused and are therefore not needed for development within the city. Therefore, staff is proposing to remove both zones from Title 18, the zoning code, and Title 3, the revenue and finance code. So that concludes my very brief presentation for this text amendment. And if it is acceptable to council, staff has tentatively scheduled this text amendment also for the September 19th council meeting. Thank you, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair Stearns. Alexis, thank you very much. Alexander.
Correct.
Thank you very much for your presentation, but I do have one question. The EP Park, isn't that part of a wetland?
Correct. So the Auburn Environmental Park is indeed, it includes a very large wetland. But that is not proposed to be rezoned. That is already zoned open space, I believe. So no effect will occur to the AEP, Auburn Environmental Park.
Okay, so that means no status quo on that then? Is that what you're trying to say?
Correct. Correct. Okay. So this doesn't change anything on a zoning map in any way whatsoever. It only changes the zoning code. So we're basically a cleanup action. We're just removing these 2 zones from the zoning ordinance entirely, but it will not affect any wetlands or the Auburn Environmental Park.
All right, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I want to make sure I frame this correctly. So within the map of the city, the BP and the EP zones have all been essentially put out of use by various ordinances over time. So the land that's covered in those spaces or would have been covered in those spaces have all been converted back to one of the other codes presented before us, right?
Correct.
So I think the question that I have is, in removing these zones, what would be most comparable if we were to have something comparable to a BP going forward? Where would that fall, and where would the EPs fall?
Well, currently, the BP zone is its own separate chapter in code. And the EP zone lies with, I can, just give me a minute. So the EP zone lies with the commercial and industrial zones. It's provided in Chapter 1823, the commercial industrial zones, and it's listed among them. The BP zone is not listed. It is its own separate entity. So when those zones were rezoned, staff chose properties that were most, or sorry, we chose zones that were most appropriate. So the, I have to go back to my text, but the EP zone parcels, they became.
Open space, I believe.
Yes, so the ones that were associated with the Auburn Environmental Park became a open space, and the other ones, and I just said it and I just forgot, they became M1, light industrial, so that's the most comparable. And then the BP zoned properties, they became C3 heavy commercial.
Okay. And then with the conversations that are happening with regards to the city of Kent and the, pardon me, the one neighborhood that we've evaluated for potential,
The bridges.
thank you, integration into the city of Auburn. Are any of those in a zone that would need to make use of BP or EP?
No.
No.
No, and the city is still, and I think the director might be able to provide more information on that, but no, I do not, we're still in consideration of which zones would be appropriate for the bridges, but the BP and EP would be appropriate
Okay.
for any of those, for the bridges properties.
Okay. I think, as I had looked at it, the environmental park zone, you know, certainly reading what had been written with it, looks like something that would be great or beneficial. And as far as having that loss from potential future zone options, I think is maybe more the question that I have of if we remove it from the title language, what's potential loss there as we're looking at comprehensive planning, not just this year, but in future years as we go forward?
I would say it's minimal. I mean, it's really remained unused. No, we have had, in the years that I've been here and since inception, I mean, we've not had anybody ask to use the EP zone or the BP zone. So I don't think we're in danger of if it goes away, we'd have any potential loss of using those zones. Because they really have remained unused.
Got it. If we didn't build it, they didn't come. If we build it, they do come. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess that's, I guess I just have to emphasize that they haven't, no one has taken us up on implementing those zones or having it rezoned, and anybody is able to rezone them. It's just hasn't been, I think, the reason why they changed it to M1, because that was just people having more investment opportunities with M1 because it doesn't come with some of the other requirements, such as, oh, sorry, I can't really think of any off the top of my head.
Mayor?
But I really, I think that we wouldn't be at any loss if these two, or if the EP zone was to go away.
Well, one thing that I'd like to add too is that the environmental parks designation, I always thought was kind of a funny name for a zoning designation and confusing because one, you have the environmental park zone and then you have the Auburn Environmental Park, and those two were really confusing to people of what the distinction was between the two. And the environmental park, clearly an open space sanctuary type area. And the environmental park zone makes it sound like it's a park that is designed around the environment. It's an industrial zone. It always was. There was a hope for a clustering of businesses that would go inside of buildings that had an environmental mission. So to me, I probably would have thought about different wording to use way back when. So those still aren't concepts that we give up on, but the environmental park zone, despite its name, was very much a light manufacturing zone.
Okay.
That's
Mayor, helpful context. Thank you both.
Thank you. What Jeff said is absolutely correct. I was on the council when we had this grand goal of having an environmental area and identifying it as such, similar to biometrics, biomedicine type things up on the east side. So our goal was working with environmentally conscious businesses to come into that area. That did not evolve as we had hoped it would. And so, as Alexandra has said, it has not been used. There are other designations that are more appropriate for the businesses that are currently there. We had a couple of businesses come forward just a few years ago asking for changes in the designation because they were not able to utilize their property to the fullest extent possible. And I believe they were just across the street from where the designation was different. So this was a grand hope of a previous council that never emerged. And so it does make sense that they go away.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I just like to thank the Planning Commission for bringing this up to us and reviewing that, because I remember serving on it and going through some of those as well. So thank you for doing such a great report. As you were reading and explaining it, it was very well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I will pass your thanks on to the Planning Commission.
Okay, anyone else? So the boundary for the EP zone, that includes Mill Creek. So are we losing any protections for Mill Creek? I mean, it seems like that's something we want to, maybe as a long-term goal, restore, revitalize, have more salmon come up there.
Absolutely. So Mill Creek, and I see it in my head, runs through the Auburn Environmental Park, I believe, or if it's adjacent to it. Yes, it does. And so Auburn Environmental Park is zoned open space, and that is a zone dedicated to preserving and protecting critical areas. So the proposed changes will not affect Mill Creek. And since it's zoned open space zone, very little development is allowed in the open space zone by design. It's really intended to protect those critical areas.
Okay, maybe I just wasn't familiar with it, because you said it went up to 15th Street Northwest. And does the environmental park go all the way up to 15th Street Northwest?
The park does extend up to 15th. It also extends across. It's kind of a collection of different ownerships within the city. So whether there's storm utilities that own the properties, or it's parks that owns the properties, but city ownership extends across 167 as well. So there's a lot of area. When you get north of 15th, Mill Creek extends further north than 15th, and then you get into areas that aren't part of the Auburn Environmental Park, but either are still owned by the city, or some of them are privately owned. And as we've come before council before on land acquisition to try to find some, or to buy some, or acquire some of the properties that have some of the straighter lines of Mill Creek and right angles of Mill Creek, so that we have future restoration projects that we can work on. But this particular set of designations affects everything south of 15th, even though Mill Creek does go further north.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandria.
Sorry,
That's
thank you.
Wonderful.
Right,
with that, I will turn everything.
Thank you, Chair Stearns. Council, we have come to the end of our council study session. This meeting is now adjourned.
Recording stopped.